All right. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining in today. My name is Joe Grabowski, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the Galapagos today. So I teach math and science in Guelph, Ontario in Canada, and I got a really cool opportunity through Lindblad Expeditions and National Geographic as a Grosvenor Teacher Fellow to travel to the Galapagos for 10 days to document my experiences and then bring it back to share with classrooms and other people in the community. So it's a pretty cool opportunity. It opens every December, and teachers from all over North America can apply. And the 30 teachers who are selected get to go on an expedition at some stage of the year. So some teachers went to the Arctic, some are going to Antarctica later in the year, a few went to the British Isles, and I was one of the lucky teachers who got to go to the Galapagos. So I'm going to share my screen now. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a virtual trip. I'm going to show you some of what I got to see while I was in the Galapagos. And then after that, we'll open it up for some questions. So it's just going to take about a second for the share to screen, or the screen to share. There we go. And there we go. So I can see you down there. Just give me a wave if you can see that map that just popped up onto the screen. All right, that's a good sign. If for any reason you can't see things anymore, someone just turn the microphone on and let me know. But we should be good to share. So for those who don't know where the Galapagos is, it's located in South America, and it's part of the country of Ecuador. So right down here where I'm circling my pointer, you can see Ecuador. And right along the equator, if you follow about 1,000 miles out, or kilometers, you're going to find the Galapagos. And it's a little collection of volcanic islands. We're going to go in a little closer now. Oops. So it's about 100 miles across, this archipelago of islands, and they formed over a hot spot in the Pacific Ocean. So through eruptions and lava bubbling to the surface over time, we had this island group form. And so if you look here, in the east, you have the older islands. These are the islands that formed first. And then you have the younger islands here, Fernandina and Isabella. And the hot spots over here near Fernandina, and the islands slowly move to the east. And so the older islands are here, and the younger ones that are still very volcanically active are located in this location. So we flew into Baltra, which is also called South Seymour, and we boarded the National Geographic Endeavour. We spent a little bit of time on Santa Cruz, and then up to North Seymour, which is this tiny little island up here. We came across to Rabida, before then moving all the way around to the youngest island, Fernandina. And then we spent 2 days exploring Isabella. This is the largest island. It's a combination of 6 volcanoes that grew together. Kind of looks like a seahorse. We then went around to Santiago, and then spent a day on Santa Cruz again. And then our last day was on San Cristobal, the furthest eastern point in the island chain. And then we flew home from there back to Ecuador. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump to the islands. We're going to take a little tour of some of the things I saw on the islands. I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Galapagos. So this is the National Geographic Endeavour. It's a really cool expedition ship, holds about 90 passengers. And you can see just along the side here, the zodiacs. And there's about 9 or 10 of them stacked on the back. And this is what we use to get around. We anchor at the different islands. We'd hop into the zodiacs. We'd go snorkeling. We'd go hiking on the islands. Or sometimes we just do a zodiac trip along the coast and check out some of the wildlife on the coast. This is North Seymour. And this was a bird island. Tons and tons different species of seabirds breed on these islands. And the most common that we came across were the blue-footed boobies. And you can see where they get their name from, their blue feet. And you can see here, this one has 2 chicks who are still fledging, so they still have their soft, downy feathers. And their feet aren't blue yet. They haven't reached maturity. So you can see the difference between the adult and the young. And the bluer the feet, the more healthy that bird was. It's an indication that it's eating well and it's doing well. In this picture here, this one is showing its feet off to a mate. It's showing its feet off to a female bird, trying to say, hey, take a look at how healthy I am. I'd be an excellent mate. And there's another thing that the male does. This is called sky pointing. So he kind of bends his back, points to the sky, and calls out. It's another way he tries to attract a mate. So he shows the feet, and he does the sky pointing to try and get her attention. This one here we watched for a little while, and unfortunately he wasn't successful. His feet weren't blue enough, or maybe she didn't like the sky pointing and she flew away. So I had to try again. Then we had the frigate bird. So this is a male frigate bird, and you can see this pouch here. This pouch they'll inflate with air, and they'll keep it that way for days. And it's super expensive to do that. It takes a lot of energy, but it's a very good indicator of their health. And the females are looking for the birds with the nice red pouches who can keep them inflated for long periods of time. So they display like this to chase away other males. And they also do this every time a female walks by. They start shaking their wings when they fly over top and calling out, trying to get their attention to look at the red pouches. There was also land iguanas on the island. These guys were pretty cool. They stake out a little territory, and each territory has a prickly pear cactus. And that's their special cactus. That's their source of food, and they protect it. We actually saw a fight on a different island between two of these guys who were stumbled into each other's territory. And you can see these little cookie cutter bites down here. This is a prickly pear cactus, and the iguana that lives in the area every once in a while takes a little bite, and he'll defend it pretty viciously. It's his stuff. It's his food. This is Rabida. This is a different island now. And the neat thing about the Galapagos is even though most of the islands are only separated by sometimes 10 miles, 20 miles, 40 miles, everyone looks so very different. You could tell where you are dependent on your surroundings. And this is a red island. The volcanic rock was iron rich, and over time it weathered, was exposed to the elements, liquid, obviously water, and essentially this island's rusting. And that's why it's taken on this beautiful red color, the volcanic rocks. And the snorkeling was amazing. So I've been to some pretty cool places snorkeling and been lucky to see 4 sea turtles, 5 sea turtles, and thought that was pretty cool. But this algae down here on the rocks attracts a lot of sea turtles. So on some of the snorkels, you'd see 1 dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen green sea turtles. So the Pacific green sea turtles are very healthy in this area of the Pacific Ocean. There's a very good population. There's another one. And this is a chocolate chip starfish. And I think you can see why it gets its name. Looks like it's covered in chocolate chips, almost like a star-shaped cookie. So that's the chocolate chip starfish. And this is still snorkeling on Rabida. These are the Galapagos mockingbirds. Very tame, not afraid of humans at all, which is like most of the animals in the Galapagos, whether it's birds or reptiles. You can get very close. And in fact, they come even closer. They grew up in isolation. They evolved in isolation, so they don't view humans as predators. So they're naive to the dangers of humans. But ecotourists are pretty safe for them. So there's 4 species of them and on different islands, and you'll see slight differences from the different islands. So these are the ones on Rabida. This is a Sally Lightfoot crab. Pretty much see these on every island. When they're young, they're a really dark black color, and when they mature, they get this really beautiful red color, yellow on their shells, beautiful purple eyes. So we've jumped islands now. We're on Fernandina. And Fernandina is a pretty unique island. It's the youngest island. It's still volcanically active. And it's one of the most well-preserved islands because there was no water, natural water. So hundreds of years ago, sailors coming by had no reason to stick around because there was such a small water supply, limited water available. So the island was able to stay more protected than some of the others in the region. So we've got our marine iguanas, which are a pretty amazing species. They go out into the water early in the day. They can dive down, feed on algae and seaweed on the rocks, come back out, and then warm up in the sun. And then you watch them, and all day long they're sneezing like crazy because they've got to get that salt out of their body, that extra salt. So they have glands in their nose, remove the salt from their body, and all day long they're sneezing, basically salt snot. onto each other. Here's another one, just having a nice relax in the sun. And the food was so rich there this time of year that many of them didn't even have to swim out into the ocean. They could just kind of walk out and have a little buffet of algae right on the rocks for them, so they didn't have to get too cold, some of them. And this was an amazing island, Fernandina. You could be standing on the shore, you look out on the water, you might see 12 or more sea turtles bobbing in the water, sea lions playing, flightless cormorants swimming and looking for fish, marine iguanas coming in and out as they're going out looking for their food. It really was a cool island. And if you look at, I'm standing on lava flow, old lava flow, this rock here. And then if you look out here, this is Isabella. And you can see some of the volcanoes that make up Isabella here in the background with the National Geographic Endeavour. This is a flightless cormorant. So they've lost their ability to fly because they don't need it anymore. There's no predators that they have to worry about. They can get all the food they need in the ocean. So their wings are much, much smaller than a cormorant you'd find, say, on the coast of Ecuador. And they've got these beautiful blue eyes. And this one here is bringing a gift to his mate. So he'll go out, look for some fish, and oftentimes he'll come back with a little present. So apparently seaweed is a popular present on Fernandina. And there he is delivering it. You can see 2 chicks here, and this is his mate right there. So they're actually going to change positions now. He's going to dry off. He's warming up in the sun, and she's going to head out in the water to find some food for these hungry chicks. And this is Isabella. So we cross the equator at sunset, and we're right by the tip of the nose of the seahorse-shaped island. And you can see some of the volcanic features of Isabella. Another part of Isabella, we went for a big hike. This is a parasitic cone of a parasitic volcano. You can see it's filled with water. It's got a lake inside. We went for a beautiful hike to the top of this cone. Had a beautiful view over the islands. You can see Fernandina here in the background. And then there's the Endeavour again. Another part of Isabella, we came across some of our first giant tortoises. So beautiful, beautiful reptiles. And as you can see, you can get down for a picture. And if you don't move out of the way, you could be run over in slow motion. They don't have a lot of fear of humans. So eventually I had to roll out of the way, or I think he would have walked right over top of me. And another land iguana. So you can see it's a slightly different species than the ones we visited earlier. It's got more coloration. And actually this was one that just wrapped up a fight with another male who was trying to get into his territory. The biggest predator in the Galapagos is the Galapagos hawks. And they'll hunt things like marine iguanas when they need to. And an interesting conservation story on Rabida, they're trying to get rid of all the mice because there's lots of invasive species. So animals that get on the islands that don't belong, that were brought by humans. So they wanted to get rid of the mice, and they're going to use poison. And they were worried the Galapagos hawks on that island would eat some of those mice and be poisoned. So before they put the poison on the island, they actually rounded up and caught all of the Galapagos hawks, took them off the island, dosed the island, were able to wipe out all the rats, and then return the Galapagos hawks back to the island. So that's an example of a successful conservation story in the Galapagos. This is Santiago. You can see beautiful beaches in the Galapagos, untouched, used very often by the green sea turtles. Will come up and go right to the tree line to dig in the sand and lay their eggs. So you could often see their tracks in the morning where they'd come up. You can see it was another beautiful hike with some great views out over the island, little lagoon. You can see the Endeavour again in the background. And this is a cool shot from the beach. It looked like this rainbow was coming out right from the back of the Endeavour. And we went snorkeling that morning, and there was a glass bottom boat, and I couldn't resist showing off underneath the glass bottom boat and waving at the people. But I learned a lesson. You have to be careful with what's underneath you. And the reef was sticking up in one point, and the rock hit my back. So got a little scraped up, but these things happen. This is a lava lizard on Santiago. So this is a male, and you can see a female here. So you can see the difference between the two. The male is actually has less of a drab or more of a drab color as opposed to the female. Usually it's the opposite, especially with birds. You can see she's got the nice orange. The sea lions were a blast, whether you're swimming with them or just on shore with them. They're very playful. Oftentimes you have to move out of the way because they go right over top of you on their way to the water. You can see sometimes they had disagreements. And then this was a baby, couldn't have been much more than a week old, just having a nice little feed from its mother. Really amazing to watch these things. You're so close, you know, sometimes 6-7 feet from the animals, and they still just behave naturally and normally like you're not even there. So an amazing group of islands. What an experience. Here you can see here I caught a sneeze in action of one of the marine iguanas. So if I go back and forth, it's almost like you can see the sneeze in action. And that's what they do. They sit around warming up after feeding in the water, and they sneeze to get the salt out of their body, the extra salt. This is Santa Cruz. So this is Puerto Ayero, and it's about 18,000 people. It's the biggest kind of settlement on the Galapagos. And you can see here it's pretty unique. You have to walk over a sea line if you want to get to the bank to do some business. It's also the home of the Charles Darwin Research Foundation. And so basically they're looking at all kinds of things going on in the Galapagos, looking how to get rid of invasive species, how to bring back native species, and how to you know, have safe levels of tourism on the island. So this is another species of Galapagos tortoise. You can see they're called saddlebacks. They've got their nice long necks to reach the leaves higher up in the trees, and they've got this saddleback here to accommodate those necks. So very different from the species of tortoises I showed you on Isabella. We went up to the highlands, which you'd almost think you went into a tropical forest of Santa Cruz, and we went hiking and looking for more giant tortoises. So here's one kind of doing its thing, having a feed. Here's another one in a lagoon. You can see the scale. This is a duck. You can see how big these tortoises are compared to something like a duck. All right, and this is San Cristobal. So this is the last island we visited and went for a hike up into the foothills. You can see beautiful views again. You can see the volcanic rock, another beautiful beach tucked in here. We did some snorkeling afterwards. Just a little bit of the terrain as you're hiking through. This is the second species of booby that you can find, the Nazca. And then here's the third species, the blue-footed booby. San Cristobal, I believe, is the only island you can find all three species living and nesting on the same island, the Nazca, the blue-footed, and the red-footed. Here we have a blue-footed and its young defending its nest from a frigate bird. So frigate birds are like the pirates of the sky. They don't find fish on their own. They'll harass the other seabirds until they regurgitate their fish, and they'll steal it. So this one here, it knows that this parent just fed, and it's trying to get the parent to regurgitate the food so it can take it. So this battle went on for a good half an hour, where they were calling and waving and flapping and flying, and the frigate bird in the end gave up. So, but it was a good, I'd say 20 minutes, half hour before it gave up. Another view out over the island. And the last beach we visited was on San Cristobal as well. And you think you're in the Caribbean. The waters are so clear and the sand is so white. And we were watching the pelicans do their thing, dive in looking for fish. See another shot there. All right. So those are some of the pictures I wanted to share with you to kind of give you a little idea of what the islands are like. I'm going to pop back from the share screen. There we go. Really was just amazing, beautiful place. The conservation work that they're doing there is phenomenal. The Charles Darwin Research Center, to give you an example, on Isabella, there's a species of finch. They're called mangrove finches, and there's only 20 nesting pairs left, which is not a lot. and they're in trouble due to an introduced fly, a tiny little fly that the eggs are laid in the nest. They rasp at the skin, they rasp at the blood of the baby birds and end up killing them. So that's a big thing to try and get rid of, is a fly, something that small. So at the research center, they have a two-part project going. On one hand, they're raising baby mangrove finches to reintroduce back into the wild. And at the same time, they're trying to get rid of the little fly. So they have a breeding program where they're breeding the flies, and they're testing different means of wiping them out. So really hard to do because you don't want to affect the finches, and you also don't want to affect the native insects. So that's an example of just how specific they have to be. Not only do they have to keep the finches alive, but at the same time, they have to find a way to get rid of these little flies. When you fly into the Galapagos, they spray down your bags to try and get rid of any kind of fungi or bacteria or any insects that may have hitched a ride. They're very strict about not taking anything, not even rocks, definitely no material from the ocean. All the areas are mapped out. You can't leave the paths. Groups can be no bigger than 16 with a naturalist, which is pretty important. They're very careful about how close you can get to the animal, 6 feet, no closer. It's a little different if the animal comes closer, but you have to do your best to keep that 6 feet distance. And even though they are so tame, you don't want to touch them, of course. So they're working really hard to protect one of the last really special places on Earth where you can find a ton of endemic species. And if you don't know what that means, endemic means they're found nowhere else in the world. So with the Galapagos, you have endemic species, but you also have species endemic to specific islands. So the marine iguana on one set of islands is a different species from the island over. The finch on one island is a different species to the next island. So it really is a unique place for scientists to research and study, and it's an amazing place to visit. So the Galapagos welcomes roughly 200,000 visitors a year, and it's all mostly by ship, and they do a really good job with that too. So they keep a GPS track of every ship in the Galapagos, and they guide them to where they can go. They all have specific routes. So the whole 10 days I was in the Galapagos, maybe only saw 2 or 3 other ships, even though there were quite a few. There were dozens others, but they're all spread out, all with their own routes, so that there's the least impact on the islands. So the Galapagos, if you want to learn a little bit more, I suggest you check out the Charles Darwin Research Foundation's website. You can learn about some more of the projects they have on the go. Because a few years ago, it was in danger of losing its World Heritage status. It was in that much trouble. And they've worked really hard to kind of bring the islands back and bring back the native species. So another example is Isabella. Isabella is a pretty big island, and there were thousands and thousands of goats brought by humans for food, got out into the wild, started breeding, and what they were doing was trampling a lot of the vegetation and eating a lot of the food, which was really affecting the giant tortoises. So over the last while, they've been doing what they can to remove, to poison, to kill, to wipe goats out from the island because they just don't belong. So if I flip back, well, Isabella, when you looked at it, there was the seahorse part along the top, and then there was a piece along the bottom. So they've wiped out goats all the way along the 4 kind of top volcanoes, and so they're just working on the bottom portion now, which is pretty impressive because there were thousands of goats on the island. And within a year, they already saw the vegetation starting to bounce back, and the tortoises are doing much better than they were. So that's another successful kind of conservation story from the Galapagos. But what I'll do now, because I think I've talked enough, and I hope you enjoyed seeing some of the pictures. Maybe right at the end, I'll share a little video of the sea lion that I was swimming with. But for now, let's jump in and let's take some questions. So we'll jump over to, let's see. There we go. Mrs. Winesky's class, your microphone's on. They're joining us from Wisconsin, and they're grade 6s.
What is your favorite type of animal?
From the Galapagos?
Yes.
Oh, that's hard because there's a lot of really amazing species there and a lot that I wanted to see. But if I had to pick, I think it would be the giant tortoises. When I was growing up and thinking about the Galapagos, I always thought about the giant tortoises and how amazing it would be to see a turtle that big, a tortoise. So I think that was my favorite to see there. And it was neat to see them in a couple of different spots. So we got really lucky that first day on Isabella. You don't normally see them there. So we got to see them there, and then again in the highlands of Santa Cruz. So it was neat to see 2 different species of them as well.
Another question? Sammy?
Do the pouches on the frigate birds serve any purpose other than attracting females?
You know, I don't think they do. If you see them when they're not inflated, it's almost, well, you've seen a balloon, right? You know what a red balloon would look like when it's all shriveled up and small? That's kind of what it looks like. It's just there. So it's just a case of a little bit of competition where the biggest, the brightest, the most inflated is going to attract the females. And over time, those were the birds that were successful. So more and more reproduced, and the pouches got bigger, the pouches got redder. And so, yeah, that's kind of selection driven by the female's preferences. But yeah, the purpose is for breeding. I don't think there's any other purpose. You see them and they just look like a deflated balloon at any other time. And one more if you have one.
Yeah, or just be
Super
loud.
loud, Tori.
Yeah, be loud.
Did you see any penguins when you were there?
Okay, so neat thing about the Galapagos is, and what's unique, with being on the equator, you've got the warm weather, but it also is the convergence of several cold water currents. So you can find fur seals and sea lions. Fur seals are normally cold water, sea lions like the warm water. But with these unique conditions, they can both exist in the same spot. And the same thing with the Galapagos penguins. Normally you'd find penguins in a colder region, but these cold deep water currents that reach the islands and push up all kinds of good nutrients keep the waters cold enough for them to survive happily and do their thing. So we got very lucky right at the very end. Which island was it? I think it was Santiago. We were just finished snorkeling. We were on our way back to the boat in the Zodiacs. We didn't see any penguins, but we spotted 2 on the shore. And we pulled over in the Zodiac and got to see them for about 2 minutes before they got a little bit nervous and they went for a swim. So we did see the penguins, but right at the last minute, which was good to see them. So I'm glad I got to see them. Good question. Let's see. Mrs. Jones, grade 3s are joining us from Texas. Your microphone's on if you have a couple questions.
Yes. What was the temperature like in the equator?
At the equator? We were there during their cooler season, but even then it was still very warm. I'd say the days were still up in the 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And when you got up in the mountains, you were surrounded by the bare rock, and then it got even hotter. So another neat thing about the equator is the sun rises right at 6 in the morning and then sets right at 6 at night. Very quickly. So that's another neat thing about being on the equator. Let's see. Yeah, so it was warm, but not as warm as you'd expect. If we were there in the drier season, it would have been a lot hotter.
All right, Katie.
How many baby birds can the bluefeet have?
Good question. So normally 1 is how many that they raise. Sometimes there's 2, but usually 1 hatches a little bit earlier. So it's a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger. It competes for the food better. So usually only 1 makes it, but sometimes 2. So you saw that picture of the 1 bird with 2. That was one of the times when the food must have been really good. The parents were able to find a lot of food, so they were able to raise 2. So normally 1, and sometimes when there's 2, 1 doesn't make it because 1 outcompetes the other for food.
What was your favorite?
My favorite
island?
My favorite island. It was definitely, no question, Fernandina. Fernandina was the youngest island, and it was one of the better protected and better preserved islands. Like I said, you could be standing on the lava rocks, looking out over the ocean at the volcanoes of Isabella. You could see dozens of sea turtles swimming in front of you, popping up for air. The sea lions were playing in the water. The flightless cormorants were swimming around. Just an amazing spot. It was covered in hundreds and hundreds of marine iguanas, kind of resting in the sun. That's where we saw the really cool flightless cormorant nest. So Fernandina was easily my favorite island, but they were all pretty amazing islands. Good question.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to jump over to our next group. They're joining us from Mount Airy, North Carolina, grade 3s. Mrs. Fletcher's group. Let me turn your microphone on.
Just stand right there and say it loud. Go ahead.
How long did it take you to get there?
Okay. Well, I had to fly to Miami first. So I flew from Toronto to Miami. That was about 4 hours. And then I had to fly from Miami to Guayaquil, and that's in Ecuador. That probably took about another 4 or 5 hours. And then to get to the Galapagos was about an hour and a half by plane. So it took the better part of a day because there were stopovers. But if I just flown directly, I could have been there in about 9, 10 hours to get there.
Okay. Go ahead. We have one more question.
Sure.
Didn't the iguanas get hurt whenever they fight?
You know what? They don't really have teeth, and a lot of their fighting is headbutting. So they display a lot. They bob their heads up and down. So one tries to look bigger than the other. If one looks bigger, sometimes the fight doesn't happen. The other one will back down and leave. If it does go to a fight, then they'll start headbutting. They'll start pushing on each other. And the big fight that we saw, the bigger male basically just pushed the other one right off the path, and it gave up. So from what we saw, they didn't really get too hurt. Maybe more just their pride was hurt, their feelings. But the fights that we saw, no one got hurt. Good question.
Joe, how many people were in your group?
So myself and another teacher were selected for this expedition. He was a teacher from Alaska. So we bunked together. But in total, on the expedition ship, there were 90 in total. Wow. And then anytime we went to shore, we break into groups of 16 because you couldn't be in a group bigger than 16 on any of the islands. All right. Thanks for the questions. And we'll visit our last group. They are joining us, Mr. Taylor in Niagara Falls, and I believe they're grade 10 students today. So let me turn their mic on. You guys have any questions?
We do. Go ahead, Michaela.
Did you face any threatening animals at all?
Were there any threatening animals?
Nope. On the Galapagos, I'd say there was 2 things you had to worry about. If you were in the water and a big male sea lion was being very territorial, they're about 400 pounds. You don't want to mess around with one of those in the water. And then you had to be careful too, scorpion fish. So they blend in beautifully with the rocks, and they have spines all along their backs with venom. So if you bumped into one of those or touched one of those, then you'd be in trouble. But they wouldn't chase you down. It would be more you bumping into it. Good question.
So how long was the process for you guys to kill off an invasive species or get rid of one?
Sorry, I missed the last part. How long was the process?
To get rid of an invasive species.
Oh, well, it just depends. So the one on Rabida to get rid of the mice was fairly quick. They put out the food and the poison, and I think it was a matter of weeks. Whereas trying to get rid of the goats on Isabella is a multi-year project that's going to take quite a bit of time. So the example with the finches, that's going to be a multi-year project because they're still breeding the flies. They're still trying to figure out what will kill them but won't hurt the finches and won't hurt any of the other bugs. So that is a multi-year. That could even be, you know, over a decade, 10 years. Then there's some of the quick ones where you put the food out, the mice eat it, and they're gone. So it varies depending on what they're trying to get rid of on the islands. Good question.
Any more? Brady?
Has the boat ever had any problems, like the engine keeps shutting down randomly or something keeps falling apart?
Did they ever have problems on the islands where they had to shut them down?
No, any problems on the boat?
Oh, the boat. No, the boat. It's a beautiful vessel, the National Geographic Endeavour. It's been in the Galapagos for quite some time, and actually it's retiring at the end of this year, and a new one, the Endeavour 2, is going to take over. But yeah, the boat was beautiful. The food was amazing. We go to sleep at night and wake up on a different island in the morning. Absolutely no problems with the boat. Very good vessel, and the crew was incredible. So the crew were mostly from Ecuador. The naturalists were all from Ecuador. Some of them were born and raised in the Galapagos. So they were some of the most knowledgeable people you could hope to meet about the Galapagos. So that was an amazing part of the experience. You got to learn a lot from the people on the boat and the naturalists. Yeah. Let's see, do you guys have maybe one more?
Did you see any fish there?
Any fish?
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of fish species. The waters are so cold and
No fish.
No fish.
yeah, the cold water, it's so nutrient rich that the schools of fish were huge. Yeah, very healthy environment to explore in the water. Yeah. So what I think I'll do now is just share that sea lion video I told you guys about. And then we'll wrap up for today. So just give me 1 second to share my screen.
Thanksgiving cups. So this is going to be the French, and then we'll make it for the turkey. I don't know if you've seen on Pinterest, we put like the leaves or like the feathers, the turkey face, and then it's last year the kids did this cutting stuff. Oh yeah.
So pretty much every snorkel, so we go sometimes twice a day, would end with these sea lions. The young ones especially were super playful, very curious about the dive or us in the water. You could swim and do somersaults with them. They yank on your fins. They pop up in your face and blow bubbles. They were a ton of fun to swim with. And you can see they were incredibly fast in the water. And then like this one, he kind of disappeared in a little cove, and you think, okay, maybe they're done. But all you'd have to do is kind of dive back down, and that would get them curious and get them excited, and they'd come back to play some more. So in a second, you'll see he's going to pop back out to continue. Also, when snorkeling, we saw some white tip reef sharks, some of the fur seals, but they weren't playful. They'd swim right by. Dozens of sea turtles. Lots of fish, those scorpion fish that I mentioned earlier. And like I said, these guys were just a ton of fun to play with. All right, I'll pop back. All right. Well, boys and girls, thanks so much for hanging out today. Thanks to your teachers for signing up for the lesson to learn a little bit more about the Galapagos. If you guys have any more questions, absolutely feel free to send a message. Your teacher can send a message and I can answer any more questions. You can tell them out of school. We've got announcements going on in the background. It's actually recess time right now. And then I've got to go teach some science. We're going to do a science experiment next. So again, thanks so much for hanging out. Maybe your teachers can show you later. We're using 360 cameras down there. So I have some cool 360 camera footage that I'm editing. And when it's finished, I'll post it on the Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants website. So your teachers can check that out as well. But anyways, you guys enjoy the rest of your day. I'm going to turn the microphones on if you guys want to say goodbye. And yeah, we'll talk again soon. Hopefully we'll see you in another session sometime in October.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for hanging out, guys. All right.